process. I think you guys, Strafford's okay. We're in, Nottingham's okay now. North, we're in the process of trying to still fix some of that.
So this had been going on for as far back as you can see?
Well, I'm not going back.
I'm hoping you're not going back to.
I'm only going back a year, you know what I mean? Because
Right.
that's all I would do.
Going back solid.
I can only correct from, year to, I can go back 10 years and say, oh, this is
Okay,
why.
so
In
at
your
least-
spare
So
time.
at least in the year before, we know that things were not done properly, we don't.
Well, you had one person doing 2 jobs for 1 year, and you had,
Oh,
yeah.
is that year?
yeah.
Oh.
The concern the management committee has,
Management committee?
the special education committee, audit committee, is we want you to understand that there's some discrepancies in the numbers. Once you understand that, I know that Mr. Roning has contacted American, and their attitude, as I understand from Mr. Roning, is that they stand by their, not necessarily numbers, but their findings. Would that be correct?
Absolutely. And I
So
think
they're
that's
standing
fair.
by their findings, never mind whether numbers were incorrect or not. For whatever reason, that personally bothers me. We paid them $35,000 to come in and sort things out, and they knew it was a mess, or we wouldn't have called them in the first place. It has nothing to do with Mr. Roning and present company. It was, from the previous, and we knew that. We knew we had problems. So, do we want to just drop it and do the best we can with the audit, or would we like to send American and say, we paid you for this and we only got that? And that's all. So our job is to tell you what we found, and we're telling you that, and now we need some help from you as to what you want us to do from there.
So if you can get the correct numbers that we have now, and then send them to, it's America or American?
American, something.
American.
They haven't been real, that's why we wanted to send, we've discussed, we think, Gail and I, think that we should send a letter
Mhm.
and ask Vasaslos and go from there.
It's a starting point.
Just a starting point, and see if it comes from the board, whether we would get a different answer other than we stick by our numbers and findings.
Can I ask something?
Sure.
I guess so the report's out and recommendations were made based on their data.
Yes.
Gathering. So are there material discrepancies in what we would implement in the report? They stand by their analysis. So as a result of these numbers that may be different, is the result to us materially different? Is the report usable, 95% usable, or does it sink the whole thing or majority of it?
Well-
Maybe wrong, but these are usable, aren't they, pretty?
I think what,
Those are the
I think
recommendations.
the findings are solid.
Yeah, that's,
I think the degree that the data points to, there's some discrepancy. I can give you some instances now. They had one of the occupational therapists is having a caseload of 20, based on the IEP system, when she really had a caseload of 40. And we went through and we verified that, we gathered the information, we looked at the IEPs, and we verified. So there's a discrepancy. That still doesn't mean that doesn't mean we don't need to keep an eye on our related services and whether we're overprescribing them. Another example is, in Strafford, actually, the report points out, I think, that they're not maximizing their Medicaid billing, that maybe they only had one person listed as a rehabilitative assistant, which allows you to bill Medicaid for the non-educational related services. And that was inaccurate, because when we checked all the IEPs, the right wording was in the IEPs for rehabilitative assistants. And Strafford definitely billed more than one paraprofessional, you can see it in your Medicaid numbers. But, and that's really, I don't want to point fingers, but that's just the state that your data was in.
But overall, it was worthwhile. I guess does this just impact the overall, hey, we provided you X amount of savings with our findings? Is that really
I
it?
think that's really up to
Yes,
the board members.
I would agree with that, yeah. So if Northwood, for instance, I'll pick on my town, should reduce 8 paras, maybe if you really looked at the correct information, it should only replace 3 paras or something, or we're overstaffed 3.
But aren't we capable of determining that on our own?
Well,
You
sure
know,
we are.
From them?
Sure we are, but we spent $35,000 for it.
Well, what we got from them is only a recommendation anyway.
That's
We
true.
do whatever the hell we want with it.
And if the board's happy, then we've done our job and said that, you know, there are some issues and
I think if we,
that's it.
Can we look at the ratio?
I'm sure we can figure it out, sure. I just, who needs the adjective? If they're not being cooperative, and we know what we're gonna need to do with the corrected numbers that we already have anyways, why fight a battle that we don't need to fight? They don't wanna do anything else, they don't, you know.
Right.
If their findings are solid, they stand behind their findings, and they're aware that there are inconsistencies in the numbers, I'm certain that we're capable of determining whatever adjustments we need to make on our own without going through a whole big process with them.
I agree with what you're saying, but I also feel like we pay $35,000. If we have the correct data, if they could punch that in, and then we get the correct information back, specific information. I think, since we've already paid $35,000, did you say that they would laugh?
I don't think they're gonna do that.
Well,
They'd have to reanalyze everything.
They would have to it would be another.
They're gonna say how much it costs is what they're gonna tell us.
did they find all the
Oh, they
issues
say right in
that
the
we
controls
had?
report, right on the first page. Right, the second page, top of the page, I believe, if I had it in front of me, I'd tell you, but they say, here, do you have it, Gail? Can I
Yeah.
borrow it for a sec? Just give me a few, if you wanna move on to something else.
Well, I guess, what Scott was saying, I understand what you're saying, Scott, and I think we have the ability to analyze our own situations and make recommendations, but it's nice to have a document to back you up, especially if you pay $35,000 for that document. And you've had experts come in and say, we recommend this and this, you have a budget committee, you have other people you have to, that you need to explain yourself to. If you have a document, it helps, and if we pay $35,000.
I just don't think they're gonna give it to us.
Yeah, right.
That's all. Maybe they do,
I
maybe
think
they
you
don't.
do have, well, I'm gonna do two things here. Do you wanna
Right.
jump in?
Well, I think that they would view that as additional services at this point because they were going off our existing numbers at the time. It's not like they pulled the wrong numbers and, were incompetent in doing that. They were using our existing numbers that, quite frankly, at the time weren't done very well. So, I think that they would look at any additional change in that as additional service.
I agree with you.
Yeah, let's take an example. So, I think it was Northwood, they said we had eight too many paraprofessionals. Well, we've already reduced, we're slowly reducing. In Nottingham, we've reduced. And in Strafford, we've reduced. So, we're still following the recommendation, but the other dicey thing about paraprofessional support is the IEP determines that. If a board turned around and said, we're gonna reduce 8 paraprofessionals and just did it, you would be in violation of all the IEPs that were written. So the way to address that is to give the team some standardization, some guidelines to use when determining paraprofessional support and make sure that they're held to those guidelines. That's been done. So, there was like 4 or 5 things that don't line up with the information that we have.
But the recommendations themselves, I mean, it only serves as a guidance for us to go back and double check everything. I mean, we're not gonna blindly follow a recommendation without checking into it in the first place. So, I mean, that's where the adjustment goes. If they say cut 8 paras, we're gonna look at it and see if all the paras are needed. Either they are or they aren't, or we're gonna reduce a certain amount. But like Scott said, it's not like we're gonna get a recommendation of 8 paras and just cut 8 paras without looking at it further.
Yeah, so here, well, we found all buildings collecting data, we found little evidence that is used effectively to make educational decisions. So data's being collected, but it's not always being used. And we'll get to that.
Personally,
Here it is, SAU 44 and school unit should analyze its data collection, maintenance, management, and use systems. So they saw problems in our data, and they made the recommendation that we take a look at those.
personally, I'm overwhelmingly tickled to death with the audit. I'm glad we did it. I came out with a different answer on many things than I went in expecting. The discussion about RTI, co-teaching and all of that was a lot more than I expected, and it's really done a lot of good for our school. I hear and see a lot of differences. What bothers me is they obviously had some problems data collecting. They didn't tell us that.
Yeah.
They didn't come to us and say, you know, we're having some issues, we need some help or whatever. So that's what, but, you know, probably we can't do anything. But, you know, I really feel that they should have said to the board, we're having some issues and, you know, up front, and given us an opportunity to resolve those issues. And they didn't, but probably too late. But we want you informed, that's what we want. And once we've informed you, then we're happy.
It may be possible that they weren't aware. They may have been going in and relying on the data that was there. And I think we asked them to work collaboratively with the new staff, and everybody was making best efforts to really try to overcome this burden. It's possible, because I know even auditors on financial statements will say we can't, you know, we're gonna rely on your data to a certain extent, and they may not have known that something was different or not completely.
So, is there anything you would like the audit committee to look at now, or do you think the audit committee is done? How, you know, is there anything you want? You want us to keep meeting?
Yeah.
Okay. And does anybody have anything they want us to look at specifically? I don't mind meeting. I don't think Gail minds meeting. You know,
And
just.
Norm is now on the committee representing.
And Norm.
Yes, I know all about it.
Okay.
Right, okay.
Oh, you will, Norm, don't worry.
But if the, you know, if the board has some direction that you want to give us, please feel free, I guess.
I just want to follow up on, Scott, you mentioned something about you've already given directives to writing IEPs as far as assigning paraprofessionals. Did you say you already did that?
Yeah, we've implemented guidelines for determining paraprofessional support. I actually did that before the audit, I believe, because I included them on the board. There's two things that I saw right after that. When I looked at the extended school year service numbers, they were way out of sync with what should be the percentage of students with disabilities who are receiving extended school year service. So I implemented an ESY decision-making framework for everybody to use when they determine ESY services. And then that reduced some numbers. It will reduce more as they become more fluid with it. And it will make sure the kids who need those services are getting those services. The other thing that I did initially was implement guidelines for paraprofessional support, which requires the team to collect data to, number one, determine the level of support, whether it's groups, no support, group support, or individual support, and in what specific areas based on the data that they collect. So rather than IEP teams making decisions on what they think, they can make decisions on what they see and what the data is.
So like a formula type thing, or how are you, just.
It's a big
interesting to
packet
see how
that
you
they
do it,
have to
yeah.
go, if you wanna stop down and get it, I distributed it to the board before.
I must have been, I wasn't.
And the whole,
The paraprofessional guidelines, I distributed those last August.
You did.
I did.
I had them.
Those were early on,
Yes.
so if you get, I'll get you that. But basically, and then, you know, the nice thing is that in schools that collect really good data on academic performance, and you guys do, Northwood's gonna do that this year with Ames Web, you'll be able to make those instructional decisions based off of that data. How far a kid is behind, how they're progressing, what level of intervention they need, whether they need 30 minutes of intervention, 60 minutes of intervention, and how they sit in the core. So a lot of those things are gonna happen over time, and those are really whole school reform kind of measures, not just special education. And actually, I'll be doing a presentation to each board on that system that Nottingham and Northwood uses right now, just for people's information. We're actually gonna have Mrs. McNeil do that one in a future meeting.
Interesting. So it's more objective.
Yes.
Hey,
I don't know if this would be for the audit committee or the management committee, or maybe a little both, is our students at Co-Brown or Dover. I know Scott has done a ton of work over the last year, that we found some discrepancies at Co-Brown, of how they handled. So I guess the high school part of it, and then for me, like, I don't know what the title would be, the at-risk children not graduating that we have to deal with.
The alt-ed.
The alt-ed.
That's the alt-ed, which
So I don't know if that would fall under one or both of those committees.
There was a special committee for all that.
There is a special, I'm on the committee, we haven't met since I've been on the board.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, and one of the reasons we haven't met is we met quite frequently at the beginning. You had basically one path for kids to take in alt-ed, and then in a relative short period of time, we added contracted social work services if they're at risk of dropping out. We added the option for VLAX, we added the option to use those social work services to try to get extended learning opportunities for credit. And we gave kids different pathways to take. And I can tell you that we started with 6 kids, and right now the census is at 4. There have been no kids added since they had 1 last year from Co-Brown. And the 4 remaining are slowly graduating out. We have 2 that are exiting right now. So that program seems to be serving its purpose. And increasing the numbers of kids. And again, a lot of it has to do with your relationship with Co-Brown. And you know, what you're willing to give for services so kids can stay there. And that, I don't think, has always been a fluid process. But, you know, if you'd like to talk about special education in Co-Brown, the interesting thing that's happened is since Nottingham has started with kids going to Co-Brown, the Dover numbers have dropped by almost a half. So now Mrs. McNeil will pick up the out-of-district kids in Dover, because there's about 18 kids in Dover, and the out-of-district kids. And then on Tuesdays and part of Thursdays, I will be at Co-Brown, helping, being the LEA at their meetings and troubleshooting with kids. So we've been able to sort of tweak that a little bit to make sure that the LEA has its presence and is doing its job at CVNA.
So you're the LEA for all 3 districts?
Yep. Except for your freshmen, your 8th graders leaving here, you're building this now.
Anything else on special education? Very good. Now it's your turn.
Now it's my turn. There was a request at the last joint board meeting to call the New Hampshire School Board Association and get a legal opinion on the non-public minutes. When can you share non-public minutes? When can you not share them with them? And you'll see on the next couple of pages on 29, 30, and 31, the response back from Barrett. I assume everybody's had a chance to read those. Does anybody have any specific questions that I can help you with?
Can I ask one quick thing? I mean, the way I read this, I just want someone to tell me if this is the way they read it. You basically shouldn't divulge these things, but sealed public, non-public minutes are completely, those are not to be discussed. But there is a sentence in here that says, unsealed public minutes, constituents may come and ask for a few more details, and they recommend either refer to the board chair, to the superintendent. So you probably wouldn't elaborate, but you could discuss in general.
Right.
So.
Well, I mean, there's legally, and then there's kind of the moral, ethical dilemma. And the way I look at it is that if you've got sealed minutes, then they're sealed. You know, you shouldn't talk about them, you shouldn't discuss them. You can't refer the people that want information really to anything because they're sealed minutes. If you've got non-public minutes within 72 hours, they need to be made public. So at that point in time, I feel that once they're made public, the best course of action, if somebody asks, is simply to refer them back to the minutes. And if the minutes are sparse, then that's what they're going to get. I do think morally and ethically that if you have your own personal opinion, or this is what I said at the meeting, then that's up to you. That's a personal choice to share your personal viewpoint. I personally think that morally and ethically, you shouldn't be saying that about anybody else. Like, I shouldn't say, you know, at such and such non-public, this is what I said, and Brian said, because then you're interpreting something, and you know, personally, I don't think that that's ethically fair. But legally, I'm not sure that, other than slander, what there would be for legal recourse.
I have a concern when we go into non-public to discuss a personnel issue or a special ed issue, something dealing with a child. And if any of that information was ever shared to the public, you know, if you're speaking about an employee, some misbehavior or something, or a misconduct, or a child, there's an issue with a child, and that a parent or that employee found out that you were sharing that publicly, I would think that's grounds for a lawsuit.
I'm not gonna argue with that, I agree that it shouldn't
Right.
be shared, I
Yeah.
mean,
I just don't
that's
think.
why I strongly recommend that when you're in non-public, if you put in the minutes, a personnel discussion took place,
Right.
or a student discipline issue took place, then it's very easy to refer people back to the minutes, and you're not really sharing a whole lot. But I think you're right, you know, if you're talking about a personnel issue and you start saying, well, we talked about so-and-so in the non-public, and this is what we talked about, then, yeah, I mean, I think that's where the slander could come in if you're.
It's only slander if it's not true,
Well,
first of all.
That's true, but
Okay.
if you don't have factual information, I mean,
But
it's.
that's, if you say what you talk, now, I'm playing devil's advocate here, because that's what this is,
Right.
that's why we paid the big lawyer big bucks for the gray answer.
Right.
Just so you know, Scott emailed back Dr. Podolsky and says, could you retry and get us a yes or a no?
Yeah, right.
And I don't think he's got that yet.
Based on what he
Yeah.
wrote, and he explained the